Hello and welcome to another episode of On Top of PR. I'm your host, Jason Mudd. Today, we are joined by Firehouse Subs Chief Marketing Officer, and she is sharing with us the experience Firehouse had with COVID-19 and the pandemic. We're going to talk about how they prepared, what they implemented, and what lessons they learned from the experience. This is going to be a great episode because you're going to learn how to prepare your business similarly and pick up a few tips that they used at Firehouse Sub for you and your company. Thank you for watching. We're glad you're here. You're going to really enjoy this episode.
Welcome to On Top of PR with Jason Mudd, presented by Review Maxer.
Hello and welcome. This is Jason Mudd. I'm your host with On Top of PR, and today I'm joined by Kristen from Firehouse. Kristen, welcome. We're glad you're here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, tell our audience a little bit about yourself and your role at Firehouse.
Sure. So I'm Kristen Madonix. I am the Vice President of Marketing at Firehouse Subs, based in Jacksonville, Florida. And I have been with the company in the marketing team since 2008. So it's been a long journey with Firehouse Subs. And when I joined, there were approaching 300 locations. And today we have about 1,180. So quite a different world today than it was when I joined a number of years ago, but there's been a lot of adventure and learning along the way. The marketing team at the time, I was the second person in the department. And now we have about 17 marketing professionals. So again, it's changed quite a bit. We have a lot more to cover geographically, a lot more topics that we cover. So social media is part of my team, the digital guest experience, media, advertising. So a lot of pieces come into the Firehouse marketing world on a daily basis, but that's what makes it interesting.
That's some tremendous growth that you're describing. And so in the time you've been there, you have seen a night and day shift, and you're still here to tell the story. And you recently, I don't know how recent it was actually, but you recently earned a significant promotion, right?
A couple years ago, I moved into the leadership position for the department. So now I'm kind of driving that part of the bus or the ship.
Or the fire truck.
Or the fire truck, much more appropriate analogy. So it's been, it's part of the reason that I've stayed at Firehouse as long as I have, is there's always something to learn and to kind of challenge yourself with. So moving from, I formerly was leading just the brand team. And so moving into leading the overall department and really having to think about all the pieces just as much as I was thinking about brand before has been professionally great for me, but also just great opportunity for the rest of the team to really build up their skill sets as the system itself has grown. So there's just more need for more adventures along the way.
Excellent. Yeah. So real quick, I want to ask you just a little bit about, you mentioned something about the digital desk experience or something like that?
Oh, digital guest. Yeah.
Digital guest. Okay. Explain that.
That's what we refer to as the team that handles loyalty, website, our app. So that is our digital guest experience. And it started really with one person, and now we have a team of 3 that's really responsible for thinking about how do we take the experience that a guest might have in the restaurant in person and translate it into a version that works just as well, if not better, in the digital space. So that can include pieces of online ordering. Certainly the app for us is kind of the center of what that team focuses on, as well as some other peripheral elements like SEO and components of that are not always overtly thought of, but kind of fall into that team's responsibility. So we talk a lot about how do we translate what we call Firehouse Heartfelt Service to a digital format, because you're missing some pieces. The human part sometimes isn't there. So what's the digital version of that? And we spend a lot of time working through what those things can be. And it might be a literal translation. So we might say, just as we say, welcome to Firehouse, when you physically walk into a restaurant, we might find a way to bring that into the app experience or the online ordering experience to translate that kind of one for one. Or we might find other ways to do different things that maybe technology provides us the opportunity to do that we don't do in person just because it's more challenging. So it's an interesting area, but a really important one, especially the loyalty component with COVID in particular, but even long before that, that was an area we were really focused on building for the franchisees and for the business overall.
Kristen, we've been talking off and on during the global pandemic that we've been dealing with, and Firehouse has been through significant service modifications, marketing modifications, et cetera, during this period of time. Why don't we kind of rewind? So, I think in early February, we were hearing about COVID-19 and how it was really affecting other countries. I know I was traveling a little bit and kind of keeping my ear and eyes open to, what's happening, and am I going to be able to come home from this trip and things like that. And so obviously we had kind of plenty of notice. I will candidly admit, I personally was really valuing or underappreciating, how significant the impact would be on operations and on the economy. I just thought it'd be business as usual. We'll try not to catch it, but we'll keep doing things. And obviously I was very wrong. And so kind of walk us through where you and your organization was in kind of mid-February. And then we'll talk about, what happened after that.
Sure. I think we were probably similarly in the same frame of mind as you were, in the sense that I think people were aware, but there have been other kind of viruses out there that we kind of work through, and the economy deals with it and things move forward. And, also our sales trends weren't obviously being impacted in any overt way. So it really wasn't until mid-March when restrictions started going into place and dining rooms started closing and some more significant actions happened in the marketplace that happened to everybody at the same time, essentially, that we all really started to think about, what is this going to mean? And I think everybody kind of started to be more aware of, this is something that we've not seen before, which I know everyone's probably said a million times, but we also don't know how long this is going to last and what it's going to look like along the way. So you kind of go into that adrenaline mode of solving for where is it going and how do I steer along the way, not knowing what's ahead. So not an easy task for anybody, but a lot of us kind of found our way through that to the best we can.
Right. So then what was the trigger that suddenly you realized, okay, this is going to be an issue for us?
For sure. So as soon as the dining room started closing, so that mid-March period, kind of around St. Patrick's Day up there, we really saw the significant impact in transactions and visits to the restaurant and sales overall. And that was across the industry. So it wasn't unique to us. And what we didn't know is how long that was going to last and what was going to change the trajectory. So we kind of had to ride that roller coaster for a little while, trying to do just the fundamental things to keep the business in a forward motion. So we ended up focusing on fundamental things that in January, I never would have thought we would have considered. So letting people know that the restaurants were open and what services we can offer when we're open. So, you can order online, you can pick it up to go. So things that people maybe weren't thinking about specifically before, but now it was incredibly important because they may want to be as distant as possible from others because we don't know what we're dealing with. So really fundamental communications on, yes, we're open and this is how we can serve you and this is what we're doing to make sure that things are safe and you are comfortable, became the focus, which, in no planning meeting did I have in 2019, did we ever talk about that as a topic we needed to communicate. But in 10 days, we realized that was the most important thing to tell people.
So you started communicating that to people, and what were the reactions, and maybe what were some of the initial lessons learned on those communications?
Sure. We learned very quickly that local was incredibly important. So Firehouse Subs is a franchised organization. So our restaurants, by and large, are owned by local franchisees. And, sometimes people see a chain and they think it's just a big corporate entity, which for a lot of franchise organizations, that's not the case, really. And certainly not for Firehouse. We are built with local owners who live in their communities, employ in their communities. So really telling people that, because there was this huge groundswell of desire to support local restaurants and support local businesses and let's all get through this together. And we wanted to make sure that the Firehouse Subs locations and our franchisees were part of that movement. So there was extra effort put into just pointing that out to folks. And people were very open to it and incredibly supportive at the time and still are. So I think the fact that Firehouse also has for a long time invested in communities through the foundation and through other just kind of initiatives locally. We already had a bit of that groundwork in place. So we weren't saying something that didn't have any support. People already had a sense of that, but it was a good reminder. So really focusing on that local component became really important. And it was really kind of nice looking back on it that there was this togetherness and we're going to get through it together and how do we help each other. And so things that we would share via social media about products or about restaurants being open, typically we would see a little bit of activity in the pre-COVID era. But once we were all kind of working through dealing with COVID, people were much more generous with sharing that information around. So they kind of helped us amplify messages where we wouldn't have seen that in the past. So those are things, again, just communicating the fundamentals. And I think looking back on it, we were all just trying to figure out how we're supposed to navigate this new experience. And so we're all doing it together. But that local component in particular became a very important piece of the overall puzzle.
For sure. And, I think that it's very, many of my friends who operate franchises or franchisors, they always say, you go from being in the restaurant business to being in the franchising business. And I think it's so appropriate what you shared is that, the brand is local, right? No matter, what your brand is, it's the local experience that consumer has, whether it's the experience in your store or the experience, you may have, for example, if you go to buy a pair of Nike shoes, for decades, you didn't go buy your Nike shoes at the Nike store, you bought them somewhere else. But it was still that experience of buying that Nike shoe and how well that sales representative was informed and how they made you feel, during your transaction and after your transaction that was part of the Nike brand. And so in your case, you're right. The local franchisee is the local brand ambassador. And consumers they don't pay a lot of attention. They just want a good product at a good price and they're out. But I think, Firehouse has done a good job of giving back to the Firehouse Foundation has done a good job of giving back to the communities and firefighters and first responders in the community. And also every franchise is a micro business, right? That's serving their community. And so, I think that's really important that franchisors get that message out there and think about grassroots and local as opposed to just being this big corporation with a lot of stores. So, and I think Firehouse has done an excellent job at that. And, it's a great brand story, great PR opportunity to tell also. So,
it's very much, I would say, part of the roots of the brand as well. So Chris and Robin Sorensen, who started it, that's how they started their first restaurant. That's how they built it. So philosophically, being a local business with local connections and really kind of living that local impact has been part of how they grew the business and saw the business, I think, since the early days. So it's nice that we've been able to maintain that, even though we have so many more locations. But I think a lot of the franchisees understand that piece of the brand history and kind of where its roots are. And that makes them successful and makes the brand successful.
Absolutely. Well, Kristen, let's take a quick break and we'll come back on the other side and talk more about the lessons learned from COVID and how that's changed Firehouse marketing and operations moving forward.
You're listening to On Top of PR with your host, Jason Mudd. Jason is a trusted advisor to some of America's most admired and fastest growing brands. He is the managing partner at Axia Public Relations, a PR agency that guides news, social, and web strategies for national companies. And now, back to the show.
Welcome back to On Top of PR. I'm Jason Mudd. I'm here with Kristen from Firehouse Subs. We're having a great conversation about Firehouse Subs and how they've grown so fast and how they've managed through COVID. If you're enjoying this episode, please don't hesitate to subscribe and or leave us a review on your favorite podcast or video platform. But Kristen, we're really glad you're here. Thank you for everything you're sharing so far. Let's get right back into it and talk about what has changed at Firehouse now based on operation and marketing in the we're kind of arguably still in the midst of it, I guess, but the COVID-19 pandemic. We're recording this in very late September and, trying to keep this relevant to our audience, in the future. So speaking of the future, tell us what you've learned.
Wow, lots. I would say one of the things that continues to be important for us is really watching the behavior of consumers and following where they lead. So a great example is how they want to order from us and interact from us as a business. So they're much more interested in ordering online versus coming in and sitting down. In a lot of cases, the options to do that are restricted. So really just looking at where the channels of trade are going and then making sure that whatever we're doing from a marketing standpoint match what the consumers are telling us. So you'll see a lot of our messaging has shifted to focus on those options so people understand. In one level, you would think, who doesn't have online ordering? Why do I need to tell anybody that? But
Right.
it is important just to say the very simple thing of, yes, you can order online, pick it up, and be out the door. We've spent a lot of time thinking about how do we communicate confidence in the sense of, yes, we have the safety components covered, but not take it to the point where we make people nervous or put ideas in their head. So really thinking about saying things like, your order will be boxed and bagged and ready to go, which really tells them all they need to know, but says it in a manner that we've got this, it's well thought through, your safety is important to us, without kind of getting into the really dramatic angles, which you could choose to do, but we were really focused on thinking about how do we instill confidence in guests and comfort, because ultimately that's what they really want from us. So a lot of those pieces came into focus over the past several months and will continue for as long as COVID continues to be a part of our lives, I would expect.
Well, I like that. I think it's important that your communication always be clear and concise. And I tell people all the time, be smart and be brief, right? And if you get into too much of the weeds, you just open up more questions and more challenges to communicating. Like you said, such a simple message.
Right. And it really takes some discipline to set those couple things aside that you want to slide in there, because you're sure everyone will get all of the points you want to make. But the reality is, if you can really focus in on what's most critical, that's really important. And we've also started to learn too that, especially if we're talking about doing a broadcast spot or a video, there are things that you have to say or want to say audibly, and there are things that you can show. So you don't always have to do both to get your point across. We might show meats being sliced without actually saying it. So we're showing the quality cue without having the audio have to do that work. So there's a little bit of that massaging of the message that we think about as well. So we don't have to leave everything that we want to communicate aside, but we don't have to give it all the same weight either. So sometimes we let the most critical message, for example, in this world, online ordering, let that lead.
So with hundreds of locations and every location seemingly having different, local ordinances and mandates and nuances, are you and your team getting involved at a micro level on each of those markets, or are you providing some general guidance to the field? Are you looking at things on a region by region? I mean, you mentioned you're headquartered in Jacksonville. Obviously, things are different in Florida than they might be in Seattle or on the West Coast. And even, I was talking to somebody earlier in New York City, for example, they're expected to wear masks outside and everywhere they go, even if they're social distancing, perhaps on the sidewalk or even in a park, maybe. I believe they're supposed to still wear a mask if they're outside in any kind of public element or environment. So where do you go to get your information, and how are you communicating this? Because that would seem overwhelming with hundreds of stores.
So we have a QA department that is amazing. And part of their responsibility is making sure we have a handle on what those regulations are by state and sometimes more granularly. So at least we understand what we're dealing with. Ultimately, the local owners, the franchisees, are the ones that need to comply. So on a marketing side, what our team works to do is make sure that the assets that we put together are flexible enough. So if someone needs to adjust something to comply with a local regulation. We had a lot of that early on. It's gotten a little bit easier now, but the number of people that could be in a restaurant, or the social distance requirement, or whether masks were required or not, and all those things were changing really fast. And so we ended up really kind of creating some assets that could be customized even on a per restaurant basis if it needed to be that granular, so that a franchisee could have the assets they need to comply and make sure they were following all the regulations as quickly as possible. And we didn't want them waiting for, somebody in Jacksonville, Florida to make them a sign. So we really tried to kind of deploy as much of that out so that they could be as responsive, because early on things were changing quite a bit. And fortunately, we're not in that position where there's as much change as often, but we still have local municipalities will make decision changes, and so we have to be flexible.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Now, are there any guidelines that your stores are taking or your company is taking in markets, regardless of, say, local regulations? So, for example, where I live, they recently pulled back and said you don't have to wear masks if you live in the county, and obviously each city within the county and each business is entitled to create their own rules, but masks are now optional in the county overall. So, how are your stores responding to things like nuances like that?
In general, the guidance is you have to comply with whatever the local requirements are, and as we just talked about, those vary. So that's first and foremost. We have to be in compliance and follow those rules.
Right.
And then beyond that, a lot of times we talk about what are the decisions you need to make your guests feel comfortable, but just as important, your crew members feel comfortable who are working there. So a lot of operators will make decisions that maybe go a little above and beyond because their crew is more comfortable and more confident because of that. So we aren't mandating that on a system-wide basis because that really varies on where you are and kind of how people feel. So we want to make sure that there's space there for those kinds of nuances to be considered and really empower the franchisee for the things that they can be discretionary on that aren't mandated by their city or their state. If they want to add things, then they're empowered to do that, especially if it makes their guests and their crew feel more confident and more comfortable.
Excellent. So, believe it or not, we're starting to run out of time. So let me ask you maybe a couple more questions. And the first one is, obviously this episode is going to attract, other CMOs and franchisors and people that are in the quick service restaurant space. Kind of what would be just some advice maybe you would give to them, either overall or specifically related to your experience with COVID?
I would say probably one of the things I've learned, and I think I appreciate it now, but maybe not when it was happening, was the demand on being just so nimble. And really, there was so much information coming out at one period of time. First, there was not enough information. Then there was too much information. And so you really got to a point where you had to stop, kind of say, this is what I know in this moment, and I'm going to make a decision, and I'm going to stick with it until this period of time, and then I can reevaluate it, because otherwise there was no way we were going to be able to move forward. So we started to really look at things in shorter spans. 30-day cycles is kind of how we started to look at it. And for that is something that I think we may continue, just because it's been helpful for us. We're much more flexible in our planning. Most of our promotions, we now are planning two. One, if things go as we expect, and one, if things go a different direction, just because it's more efficient and certainly less pressure on everybody if we have those ready to go. And
is always good.
Right. And, I think the team is now kind of used to that. So it's not a new idea anymore. And I think it's also helpful from a franchisee perspective of, I know there's a plan if something goes an unexpected direction. And so much of COVID has been unexpected and uncertain that I think having a little bit of like, all right, I know that there's an alternative option here. If something happens, I can think about something else and not worry about, going down another path. So that has been really helpful. And I imagine that discipline may hang along long after COVID is in the rearview mirror. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, Kristen, I want to thank you for being on the episode. If our audience wants to connect with you, what's the preferred way for them to reach out? Would that be through LinkedIn or social media? What's your preference?
LinkedIn is a great way to find me. So you can just message me via LinkedIn. So Kristen Madonix is the name that you'll find, and happy to interact.
Yeah, and please make sure you say that you heard her on Top of PR as opposed to just a random connection request. And I'm sure we all get too many of those. And like, do I know this person? I'm not sure. So I always like to, a PSA is always try to build some kind of context, right? So the person understands, why are you reaching out to me, and what are we going to talk about, kind of thing. So, Well, that was very cool. I appreciate that. And I also just think if you enjoyed this episode, the Firehouse Foundation does a lot in the communities where there are Firehouse locations. So if you have a Firehouse location near you, or you just enjoyed what Kristen shared and that was beneficial to you, please consider making an online donation. I think you can make them online, can't you, to the Firehouse Foundation?
The Firehouse Subs Public Safety Foundation. Yes, they will gladly accept online donations. And also, anytime you make a purchase at Firehouse Subs in the U.S., a portion of that purchase is donated to the foundation. So you can do double amount of good. Donate online and then buy a sandwich, and that'll include a donation as well.
I love it. Yeah, that sounds great. And first responders obviously need support as well. But your foundation, your organization has done so much to donate much needed equipment and communities. And I'm just really impressed with that story. And maybe on another episode we could talk more about that specifically, because I know we could spend an entire show just talking about the philanthropy and the vision of your founders and how they've been good partners throughout the decades that they've been, busy growing and expanding the Firehouse Subs restaurants across North America.
Absolutely. It's such an important part of the story, as you mentioned, and the brand, and part of what helps us grow. Yeah, we should definitely get together and talk about it.
That sounds good. We'll do it soon. Kristen, again, be well. Thank you to you and yours for joining us today. And if there's everything we can do for you, please let us know.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks for being here. Be well.
This has been On Top of PR with Jason Mudd, presented by Review Maxer.